she just blazed so many trails as a first. I mean, there's a whole long list of things that she was the first to do. And she always did it with such courage and determination, and was so gracious to people, but also kind of a model of someone who couldn't be intimidated or deterred from her path, that I think she just set an example for all of us that is impeccable. I mean, I think we can all look at her for an example of, 18 different qualities that we would all like to emulate.
Her ability, not only in her legal career, but I think after reading her book and talking with her some in her life, to really believe in herself and trust her own voice. Because I think there were a lot of times in her life where she thought she'd like to do something and people said to her, well, she couldn't do that because she didn't fit the model or whatever reason. And I don't think she listened to them. I mean, I don't think it even gave her pause. I think she just proceeded ahead and went for what it was she wanted to do. And more often than not, I think she achieved it too.
So for me, when I think about knowing Betty at that time in my life, knowing Betty meant Betty was there. And Betty was that person in the courtroom who gave me my sense of place in the courtroom. She gave me my sense of legitimacy. There were very few women generally in the profession at that time. Then I was entering as a lawyer and still in that same courtroom by 1980. Very few women in the courtroom as advocates, only one on 3 different panels of the Court of Appeals was a woman. And she was symbolic in that sense. She was symbolic of the fact that we as women could be there, should be there, and what we could accomplish by being in the legal profession at that time.
One thing I want to be sure is on the record is that a principle I got from Betty that would have been good for me to have known when I was, say, in my 20s, was that you live your life in stages, and I didn't have that perspective. You live your life in stages, and you need a different focus at each stage of your life. And yes, you can do it all, you can have it all, but one step at a time.
She knew who she was comfortable in her own skin, and she, win or lose, she was going to come out of that and have done her best, but she was not going to do it to meet somebody else's expectations.
As Ann Aiken also said, when Betty called, you responded because she wasn't going to waste your time. It would be both interesting and it would be productive and it would be for a good cause.
She was breaking ground in the legislature, breaking ground as a member of the judiciary, being the first woman here, being, identifying and packaging and moving legislation. For me, she opened the political window for young women for 2 generations about what was possible. And our political landscape is profoundly different because of that unique contribution.
When Justice Roberts was in the Senate in the late 60s and the early 70s, she was the only woman at that time for a short period of time, and it was certainly when the issue of choice was erupting around the country. And in her book, she talks about when she came to the realization that unless women can control their reproductive selves, they will never have true equality, not only in this country, but around the world. And she lived that belief by working hard not only at the Oregon legislature to pass legislation to enable women of all income levels to access abortion in this state, but she also embodied the spirit of that as a lawyer working in the courtroom to fight to make sure that women would have reproductive access. So at the same time she was serving in the legislature, fighting to work toward reproductive equality at the Capitol, she was also working as a lawyer in the courtroom to ensure women would have right to reproductive access. So that to me is a tremendous legacy that Oregon, the women of Oregon, still enjoy today. And that is so unlike many other states across the country.
When the bottle bill came up again, because it was defeated the first time, but when it came up again, the Salem airport was just filled with Lear jets. Lear jets from companies that were very opposed to the bottle bill. They did not want that passed. Beer people, glass makers, all kinds of people like that that had a stake in that issue. And there was so much pressure not to pass it that second time that we were afraid that we wouldn't be able to make it. But the day after we thought that we were going to lose it, Betty Roberts stood up on the floor of the Senate and described how she was offered a bribe the night before by one of these companies. And that's all it took.
In the early 70s, before I was in elected office myself, she had, we call her the dean of the women's movement in those days, because she organized the women legislators and I was the lobbyist, and she was always the go-to person for us. She just somehow, there was a bit of magic about her abilities in that area, that she was able to get a lot of different, at that point we were focused on women's rights legislation, but she was able to pull everyone together and kind of, you know, keep everyone moving toward the goal. It was an amazing skill.
She just knew in her blood how to run for office, and she understood that many of us, though we wanted to be judges, wouldn't have a clue.
She would say, well, start with a 3-ring binder, and this is what you should put in it, and here's how to do your schedule, and wear comfortable shoes, and have someone else drive for you. Lots of practical advice as well as the big picture. So she was a great influence and a great help.
I always felt like I was sort of a running back on a football team, and Betty was out there in front blocking for me, because I felt like this person had done so much to make my life so much easier, being a lawyer and a judge. And so I told the story, and then afterwards she came up to me and she looked very serious, and as she could, as you know, and it kind of worried me. And she was saying, well, she said, I really liked your football story, but it really wasn't quite right. And I said, oh, really? What was that? She said, well, you know, I really did play football in Texas, but I was a running back. I was not a lineman. And and she laughed. She had that great laugh. And I thought to myself, well, of course, you know, she would be one of the first women to play football, and she would be good, and she would be carrying the ball.
Betty adored having a big family, and she loved being the matriarch of the family. I hear tales, and I've seen enough of the pictures from the family to know that when she and Keith Skelton especially were married, her 4 kids and his 4 kids, who all lived together in various homes, would have enormous holiday celebrations. And in the years since I've become a part of the family, kind of first de facto and then legally, I know how much she just adored having everybody together. Now, when Betty says we're going to have dinner at her house, this is a command performance, you see. And so Betty loved being in charge. She loved organization. She, as I said, had strong opinions about everything, and that's what you loved about her. You always knew where you stood with Betty. She was a caring person. She was a thoughtful person, and she was one of the most aggravating bridge players I've ever played with in my entire life.
It's really hard for me to conceptualize the effort that it took for her to get where she got. So she was raising her children, 4 of them I believe, while she was going to law school, while she was working as a teacher, while she was running for the legislature. I mean, most of us would have a hard time doing 1 or 2 of those things, but to do all of those at the same time are really mind-boggling to me. And so whenever I'm having a tough day or struggling, I think back to the efforts that she made in order to succeed and the barriers that she broke.
Betty's is this phrase is used too often, but this is literally true. Betty's career is a turning point in Oregon history. It is happily united with that of Norma Paulus, so that the state suddenly was exposed to 2 women in different parties who could do darn near anything.
So she had this bigger view of what the world needed as an even playing field, whether you were a woman, a little boy, a minority, someone coming to this country who's not necessarily native speaking. Any opportunity that closed a door for someone needed to be kicked open. So the legacy for Betty is to work on opportunities that make certain that everybody has the best opportunities and a fair opportunity to succeed, to have an American dream. That's really what she was about. You don't come from poverty out of Texas and forget that somebody made it happen for you. So her legacy was to reach back and pull people up.
I think the most critical thing for women and minorities, underrepresented folks of all backgrounds, is to look at her as an inspiration in terms of vigilance, in terms of persistence, doggedness even. It's that grit part of her story. But the flip side too, right? The grace. And to me, it's Betty's grace that is so instructive, and her willingness all the way through her life to put a hand out to folks who wanted to have a seat at the table, to make sure that they did, all the way to the very end. And I think that if there's one thing we can take away, it's that importance in bringing along the folks who come behind us and making sure the table gets bigger and bigger.
I would like her to be remembered as a very, very strong, intelligent woman who was interested in improving the quality of life in women for Oregon and keeping the political system clean and responsive. And she was a strong mentor for all of us.
I think Betty's legacy, first of all, was she was fearless about taking every opportunity that came along. If there wasn't an opportunity, she made one. And she expected the best from herself and from everyone else as well. And so I think our legacy is to continue to do what she did and to do our very best and to help others to do their very best as well.
It seems to me that her legacy as a terrific citizen, she did the things that we would want any citizen to do well. She took part in public life, she had a view, she was willing to listen to others, and she was decisive when she had to be. So in addition to the example she set for other women showing, see, we can be the things that thus far only men have been, she just simply set an example for men and women in terms of the way a public, spirited citizen ought to behave.
Even at the end, she was there connecting people. And that's what I remember the most about Betty, was that she was somebody who saw that there was more power when people were connected. There was more of an impact when there was more than one person, when there were more voices. And she was always pulling people together and connecting them.
Betty is the ultimate you go girl person in so many of our lives. I think she would want women and minorities to just keep on passing the torch. As she said, I'm holding on to this torch as long as I can, and she did. But at the same time, she was making sure that anybody who wanted to could get to where they wanted to go with the help of this community of women, lawyers, judges, politicians. And I think Betty would just say, check in with yourself, make sure it's what you want to do, make sure you have the stomach for it, and then just go for it.
We should be passing the torch. We should be lighting this world on fire. We should be making sure that women of all colors and all income levels have access to true equality, not only legally, in the court system, on the ground, in employment places. I do believe we should be carrying on her torch.